mean, I did think that was one of the really interesting things that is in this piece, is the way that you dealt with your own relationship with these kinds of things, particularly on the island itself, but also just with the process of kind of turning things into exotic adventures. I thought that you wrote about both of those aspects in a very perceptive way, both about yourself and also about John Allen Chau. Um, I, it was very, very interesting to me when you sort of you kind of paint this picture of this young man who is coming from a household where there have been different kinds of tensions and problems, a very American story. Um, and I got the impression from your piece that the pull for him was not purely religious, that there were other things that were going on, that he was also drawn to wilderness. And it kind of reminded me of another book, Into the Wild, which also sort of unpacks an ordinary, American young man who is pulled into these kind of improbable wilderness adventures and wants to kind of experience something that nobody else can experience. And that religion sort of came along on top of that in a way. That's the way that I understood from reading your story. And I thought it was very interesting the way that you tied that to your own looking for adventure and looking for the unknown, that I think so many foreign correspondents can also relate to, because there is at the heart of foreign correspondence a lot of these same tensions and these same problematic histories.
Right.
So talk to me about that. Like, what do you think, when you look at yourself and when you look at Mr. Chau, how do you see this sort of search for the unknown that spans across these different professions?
Well, I mean, I saw that, John presented himself as a kind of consummate outdoorsman, a kind of trail bro. He was really active on Instagram. And what's fascinating by that is that I guess that a lot of people lead kind of Instagram lives where they project an image. John was doing that as a cover, because he was very deliberately not mentioning his real religious mission. But it was a way to, that Instagram account and John's friends and so on, there was a whole subculture there that I hadn't known about, which was kind of the missionary bros. These guys, I guess our depiction of kind of high school Christianity is sort of the squares. But these guys are pretty cool. They were outdoorsy, cliff jumping types who had faith. And that I thought was kind of fascinating. The parallels you're talking about between what John was doing and what you and I've been doing for years as foreign correspondents, the deeper I got into the story, the more kind of uncomfortably close and apparent they were. I definitely spend many years of my life running around, getting into sort of slightly extreme circumstances partly out of immaturity. I love that kind of adventure and going to wild places and meeting strange people with guns. I loved it. I wouldn't claim any kind of high moral for it. And I thought John was the same. In the same way, when I go to a place like Congo and Somalia, over the years, it's become more and more apparent to me how exploitative that process can be. I get what I need and what my magazine needs for a good story, but I'm absolutely forbidden to pay the person who's allowing my profession to exist. That's an ethical no-no. It is, and John is, in the same way, he's going out there to satisfy the needs and the demands and the compulsions of his faith, but he's not really giving any countenance to the agency or the freedoms of the people that he's approaching. These are, I try in the article, I put a lot of myself in there, you're right. I put a lot of my own doubts about how I've been spending my life in there. And the striking thing about John is that, well, at least in public, he never had those doubts. In his diary, he never second guessed himself ever.
That's so interesting.
There is a certain amount of terror and fear. There was a point at which he knew that he might well die. But if you're a man of faith, that, you know, he's expecting a miracle, right? He you know, so this, he sees it as another test, and he doesn't rethink. And I thought, in a way, actually, towards the end, he doesn't have the maturity to face the humiliation of turning around and going home and telling everybody that it didn't work out.
Tell me about the journal. I feel like it's such a part of the piece that you wrote, and it creates such a window of insight into the character that you're writing about. How did you get the journal, and how did you decide how to use it inside the piece? And did you take it at face value?
The journal was,
the
journal's an extraordinary document. It spans the 4 days after John first leaves, and he makes his various forays onto the island, and it ends literally as he makes his fatal swim to the island. And it starts off really hyper enthusiastic. You know, he's really pumped. He can't wait. He's been waiting for this moment all his life, and he's finally setting off. And then it just goes into this really sudden decline. You know, he moves from jubilation to frustration when the tribe doesn't accept him at first, then terror. They try and kill him. A kid comes out of nowhere and shoots him with an arrow. It hits a Bible that he's holding up. You know, you and I would imagine, I imagine our reaction would be close shave. Of course, John thinks he's been saved by God. And then the night before he dies, he doesn't get a lot of sleep, and he's writing a lot. And it's quite tearful. It's very emotional. He says goodbye to friends and family. But as I say, he doesn't express doubt. He expresses terror. He says he doesn't want to die. He's confronting that that's a very real possibility now. But yeah, as a sort of, as a trajectory, as a journey, it's the most extraordinary document, incredibly moving. And it's really long, you know, so that was a real advantage. We used in Outside most of it. Mm-hmm. And I felt like, you know, I needed 10,000 words because 1,500, 2,000 of them are John's journal, and to have his voice coming through, again, you know, it's an incredible, it's an unbeatable tool to get inside someone's head. You know, I couldn't write that. You know,
how did you actually get it? Like, how did you physically get access to the journal?
That was being passed around Port Blair. It wasn't hard. The police had done a transcript, which was inaccurate, but they'd also scanned the actual written documents. So I had those pages, and I think the New York Times stuck it up on its website or something as well. You know, it was around. It was just that no one had really used it properly. You know, people had taken a quote here and there, you know, not because they were bad journalists, just because they didn't have the space. But, you know, when you've got a decent long form page, you know, 14 pages, right, you can really get into it. That I suddenly, you know, this story required, you know, with all the backstory, the colonial story, John's diary, this story required like some real estate.